that I could get more work done in a month than I could get more work done in a day than I used to be able to get done in a month. Well, that was in the mid-'80s. Now it's like I can get more work done in a day than I could get done in a year. That's not so good. You know, we're always on. You know, we're always on. Not so good. We're not computer servers, we're human beings. So here is the evidence from Liz Blackburn's lab and Alyssa Eppel, who is the mindfulness researcher in her lab, Proceedings in National Academy of Sciences, showing telomere length as a function of years of chronicity of caregiving of children. This is parents with children with severe medical and disabilities. Okay? So it's like an unavoidable stress. You can't just walk out on your chest and say, I don't do stress. Sorry, goodbye, children. No, you can't do that. But look at this, also in that study. This is a perceived scale, a perceived stress scale. It's the perception of stress that makes the difference. If you are just dealing with it because it's the way it is, then you can be more transparent to the stress. Your telomeres are longer. If you take everything personally, your telomeres degrade. So if you want one take-home message from this turns out to be harder to enact than it is to say. Don't take things personally when they're not personal. Okay? Then you might ask, well, when are they not personal? That's a good question to keep asking yourself. It may be they're never personal. It may be that the you that you think you are is not the real you, that you're much bigger. And now the neuroscience is actually showing that. You want to be your narrative self? Fine. Then you're using certain regions of the brain. You want to be your direct moment-by-moment experiential self, grounded in the body? You're using lateral networks in the brain, a whole different brain profile. So you choose. One is related more to happiness. The left activation in the prefrontal cortex, if you put monks in the scanners, and I'll show you some pictures of that, you know, they have tremendous activation in the left prefrontal cortex, in particular regions that have to do with approach and that have to do with emotional balance. And when we train people in MBSR, they shift from right activation to left activation in 8 weeks. Okay? Their brains actually change structure in 8 weeks. Work out of Sarah Lazar's lab, a German postdoctoral fellow who's training with us in MBSR and has been our student, Britta Herzl, for years from Germany, young neuroscientist, has demonstrated that major regions of the brain change with 8 weeks of mindfulness training in MBSR, including the hippocampus, including the cerebellum, including the posterior cingulate cortex. All of these are involved in making meaning, in self-regulation, in perception, decoding, memory, and learning. Not bad for 8 weeks of what looks a lot, if you were looking in from the outside on our patients, looks a lot like nothing. They do nothing lying down. Then they do nothing sitting. Then they do nothing walking, like this, like the Night of the Living Dead, you know, really slow meditative walking. They're doing nothing, and healthcare is paying for it. Amazing. How did they pull that off? And it turns out the brains are changing not just in terms of activity, in terms of structure. Significant thickening in those regions I mentioned, significant thinning in the amygdala, which is the emotional reactivity center, the threat center that fires off all the time whenever we feel threatened or, you know, accosted in one way or another. So, God, I got a whole talk here that I'm not going to give. How many of you see a triangle? Raise your hands if you see a triangle in this picture. Okay, now keep your hands up there. Okay. Now look around so that you know you're not alone. If you see a triangle in that picture, it's interesting because there's no triangle in that picture. A triangle is defined by a three-sided figure, and what your mind does is it puts in the sides. If we shifted that little Pac-Man the tiniest little bit, so the mind can actually see things that are not there. The brain actually does that. It's so good at that. If I had time, I would show you this movie, which... How How many of you have seen this image? Yeah, you can't use it anymore, but I'll just play it anyway. Whoops. Doesn't want to do that. Let me see. Anyway, it's a movie. And they're passing around basketballs, and you ask the group, you ask the room to sort of count the number of times the people in the white shirts pass the basketballs. And I could get it to work, but it would take too long. So, and in the middle of it, I'll try one more time, in the middle of it, because it's, oh. No. Okay. So you're counting the number of times the people in the white shirts are passing the basketballs. One basketball per each, the whites and the blacks. And then in the middle, this gorilla comes out. And then goes off to the other side. But when you ask people, well, to count the number of times the people in the white shirts pass the basketball, they don't actually see the gorilla. If we did it and none of you had seen it, 95% of people would have counted the number of times the people pass the basketball. Usually you get a Poisson distribution, so you can't even count correctly. But then you don't see the gorilla. Why? Because the mind has told itself, the brain has told itself, the white shirts are what's important. Tune out everything that's not white. Well, the brain, it turns out, is fantastic. I just showed you, it sees things that aren't there, and it doesn't see things that are there. Not very reliable. Now, does that apply to you? I'll leave that for you to decide. Just ask your spouse or your mother or your father, because that is part of the default mode. We are out of touch, seriously out of touch with a lot of different elements of this. And this is just a quote from William James that basically saying if we could learn how to bring the mind back when it was wandering, that would be a good thing. It turns out the Buddhists have been doing that for thousands of years. So I'm going to stop actually at this point and take a few questions. We have some time for questions, and then we'll stop for the evening. Obviously, you could see that I've just gotten started. I hope you've just gotten started. I'm not joking, because this doesn't stop. It's called your life, and it's all really more than magnificent. And if you can get into that implicational meaning of the poems, the poetry, then there's the potential to actually live your life as if it really mattered moment by moment. And it turns out that that's recruiting and morphing brain pathways that when you're depressed and you're into depressive rumination, it's not about shutting that stuff off, that kind of toxic thought stream, but actually learning how to hold it differently, and then you don't take it personally, and then you actually don't fall into depression. You don't relapse into depression, and I'm talking major depressive disorder. And so, and that affects your telomeres, and that affects actually gene expression in your body, upregulating and downregulating hundreds of genes that have to do with cancer and that have to do with inflammatory responses. So if your whole body is really plastic, and the more you tune the mind and the body together, the more you participate in your own health and well-being. I like to call the medicine of the future, or the medicine of the present actually, participatory medicine. That's what, because there's not enough money to fund medicine if we just use the auto mechanics model. So we need to all participate. And isn't it interesting that in order to participate, the greatest evidence is suggesting we need to go back to ancient practices from very, very old traditions that are mostly not from this side of the planet, but that it turns out have deep, deep connections with our culture and with our nervous system and with our love. So I'll leave it at that. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm open to having a few questions. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your attention. And
And
It's
if
6
you,
o'clock,
if you
so we
need
don't-
to go, we understand.
Yeah,
And
obviously,
so
it's 6 o'clock.
There is a book signing following outside the auditorium after the question and answer period, just so people know.
And so why don't we, okay, so you've got it, why don't you line up with that microphone behind the guy who has it, and we've got another one over here. So go ahead. Oh, are you not, you're not actually asking a question, you're just offering them, well, give it to her.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that talk. It was fascinating. One question I had was actually from your biography that was provided, which was just talking about you and your wife's interest in supporting initiatives that further mindfulness in K through 12 education.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could just provide some examples of what exactly that can look like in public education and beyond.
Okay, thank you for that question. I alluded to it, but obviously, you know, the subject of mindfulness is so vast, and to do it in a way that isn't just throwing facts at you would take actually multiple occasions. Or you can remember what we touched on today and then find out more for yourself, which is really the best part. But in the book that my wife and I, Mila and I, wrote together on mindful parenting, which is a whole other story, there's a chapter in there about a fourth and fifth grade teacher from a Utah public school who herself experienced mindfulness in MBSR for medical reasons, health reasons, and then brought it into her classroom against all of my advice in Mormon, Utah, and it transformed the entire school. So you could start there. You can also Google mindfulness in education. You'll find out there are groups of teachers in lots of different places that are doing this. And if you want to take a trip up 89 to South Burlington, Vermont, I was just there a couple of weeks ago, and they are doing amazing things in that school system. The superintendent and one of the principals actually came to a day-long mindfulness retreat that I did for the teachers, and there are hundreds of teachers bringing mindfulness into their curriculum at every age. So there's a lot to be said about it. I think it's one of the best things to happen in modern education, and it's really inspiring the teachers because nowadays it's so challenging and there's so much stress in that profession, and so many of the kids come and they're not ready to learn, so they need to learn how to learn, tuning the instrument before you play it, so to speak, and this is a way to actually allow that to happen, and in a way that's, I've been in classrooms like this in Oakland and in Manhattan, New York City, on public schools, unbelievable. I mean, and one teacher in South Burlington called it pin drop moment. You could hear a pin drop in these classes where a lot of the kids are like ordinarily all over the place, but they have learned how to actually drop in. It's valuable for attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it's also valuable for the teacher's sanity. Thank you. So.
Hello. I was just wondering what your general advice would be when we're trying to, live it moment by moment, but we're faced with moments where we have to make decisions. And I know we have to make like dozens of decisions every day, and sometimes there are big decisions regarding like our futures or personal relationships. And my friends are always telling me like, don't overthink it. But I mean,
don't overthink it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I know it's really difficult. So.
Well, it's a great question. Now you want an answer?
Yeah. I realize that's the reason why I decided to come today.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. You're probably going to overthink it, but you can hold that in awareness, the overthinking, and the awareness will actually take care of you. A lot of times, let's say if it's relationships, you mentioned relationships, is that right? And it's very complicated, and mindfulness is all about relationships. We start with the body. What's my relationship with my body? It's pretty weird even to say, I have a relationship with my body. Who's talking? Oh, you're not your body, but you have a body. Oh, yeah? So there's something even there that we don't know a lot more than we let on. Okay, then you have a relationship with your mind and your heart. In all Asian languages, as you may know, the word for mind and word for heart is the same word. So when you hear the word mindfulness, if you're not hearing heartfulness, you're not really understanding it. It's got this tenor of spaciousness of heart. Okay? So, and inside of that, a certain kind of trust. And trust in what? How about your own beauty? Okay? So when you start to know yourself in that kind of non-conceptual way, not with thinking, but through embodied awareness of sensation and of, hearing and smelling and tasting and so forth, and of your thoughts that are overthinking who to be in relationship with or who to break off a relationship with or whatever it is, and you're not judging that whole thing, your deeper intuition and wisdom is trustworthy. And when you get into trouble, that's trustworthy too, because you see, oh, I see, I made this kind of decision, I overthought it to this degree, and I wound up whammo, in some place I didn't want to be. That's important information. That's useful data. Then you learn from that, and the next time, if you're really, 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 really mindful, you won't repeat the same pattern. But mostly what we do is repeat the same old pattern over and over and over again, because we're attracted to just those people who are not so healthy for us. If you've read The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle, which I recommend you read for these kinds of things, he talks about a kind of construct called the pain body. So a lot of falling in love is if you start to look at it, it's like my pain body, what's all knotted up and painful and hurt in me, recognizes what's all knotted up and painful and hurt in you, and those pain bodies fall in love. Meanwhile, not a good idea, because it's what you call a dysfunctional relationship from the start, But the awareness can see that, and it can save you. I have a friend at MIT, one of the graduate students with me in my lab, and he decided to get married at one point. And the only time I've ever done this, I gave somebody advice about who they wanted to marry. And I said, don't do it. I was young and arrogant, so I said, don't do it. He did it anyway, of course. He got married. 3 years later, they got divorced. And he said to me later, how come it took you 3 seconds to see what it took me 3 years to see? And I said, well, that's because, I wasn't in it. To see it when you're in it, that requires a whole different rotation in consciousness. But it is trustworthy. So there's no answer to your question. It's life unfolding. And whether it's your relationship to another person or whether it's choosing courses or a career path or anything like that, trust your love. And as, what's his name? Joseph Campbell said, and this is a really good piece of advice, follow your bliss. Follow your bliss. And it will teach you everything you need to know, including how sometimes following your bliss needs to be modulated a little bit. I hope that helps, because I don't have anything else to say.
Thank you.
People are saying that life is more complicated and more stressful now, and I will believe it. I don't have anything to measure it against, but and also the same with war, that people go to war and they come back having experienced things that they might not have lived through in other wars. And there are scientists working on PTSD and trying to help people heal from those things that they might not have lived through. And so sometimes I think about how if the world is becoming more stressful or complicated, and our answer is change yourself, change your relationship with that stress. It seems, I'm not sure, I don't know how to say it, but...
I got it.
Yeah.
Thanks, that's the other half of my talk.
All right.
So thank you for bringing that up. So let me just very quickly say, this isn't about changing yourself. It's about, it's exactly the opposite of changing yourself. It's recognizing the beauty in yourself already. No change necessary. Now imagine if the Congress actually were mindful. Okay? There is a congressman in the Congress now, Tim Ryan from the 17th District in Ohio, who is doing everything he can to bring mindfulness into the mainstream in political and economic circles, okay? You'll see his name around from time to time, 5th-term congressman. But the much larger thing, and I wrote 100 pages about mindful politics and coming to our senses. This is not about forgetting about social change or transformation, but in order to really have profound social change that's in alignment with humanity and with kindness, we have to look at our own minds, because even the social change agents are driven by greed, hatred, and delusion, just like all the rest of us. Okay, so until we learn how to sort of at least recognize the toxic or the sort of acquisitive, aggressive, violent aspects in ourselves, then we can do all we want to transform the institutions and even the laws, but human beings being what they are, what we need to do is transform the species. Or I wouldn't say transform the species, I would say have the species come into its own, because we call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens. In Latin, sapere is the verb to taste or to know, K-N-O-W. So Homo sapiens sapiens is a species that knows, and knows that it knows. In other words, awareness, yes, and meta-awareness, awareness of awareness. Now, if we really, that would be wisdom. If we actually were wise, then we would see what war does to societies. We would understand that we, you know, with the kind of precocity in weapons and firepower and everything, we need to find other ways of resolving human conflict. But where's that going to come from? It's going to come out of the same human heart and the same human mind, and of corporations, which after all mean bodies, okay? The corpus, or the body politic. And that's made up of human beings. So we do need to sort of tune the instrument on lots of different levels, including the law and jurisprudence, in order to actually privilege awareness over a kind of dualistic, adversarial condition where it's really winners and losers. And a huge amount of harm and social injustice gets done, and then we learn to sort of tolerate it, thinking, well, 100 years from now, it'll be better. So this is not going to happen overnight. I have a very long time horizon. Like I like to say, one Zen master put it this way, never forget the 1,000-year view. I actually have it pretty much in the 1,000-year view. Then if it happens in 100, so much the better. Even where we would site nuclear power plants, if we were building nuclear power plants, say, in northern Japan, for instance, where would you site them, knowing the geology of the Pacific Rim in northern Japan? Oh, maybe not too close to the water. I don't know. You need an awful lot of mindfulness to actually, you know, come up with something like that. So it has infinite number of implications, and I apologize for actually not having spent more time on this talk going there. It is all in coming to our senses, and there's an awful lot happening in the world nowadays around that. So we'll take one more and then we'll stop. So, or two more. If two people are standing up, I'll take, are you standing up for a question? You're just the microphone holder.
Yeah.
Do you want to sing or something, or just like, you got, this is your moment. I mean, American Idol.
I can make it brief.
Okay, so this will be, you want to sing?
So I'm hoping, I'm a resident at the hospital here.
Okay.
And I know you're getting involved with trying to bring this into, you know, more mainstream medicine. And I'm hoping it's not going to be like 100, you know,
Oh, no, no,
150 years.
it's already in mainstream medicine.
Although the thing, well, what
just
I wanted
not here.
to ask you about, is that right? So I mean, it's definitely not encouraged for us to take care of ourselves, and
It
the
isn't?
amount of stresses and appointments and phone calls and now EDH and our new computer system and
I heard about that.
and 30-minute, you know, I'm in psychiatry, and 30 minutes to, like, you know, adjust meds, and
right.
also the person wants to talk to me
Right.
and all of that, and you know, it's completely stressed me out. But I can only imagine, and I have pretty great attendings and good, you know, a great faculty. But if I were to say, you know what, I'm going to go to Shambhala to meditate, because I do meditation at Shambhala, and I've
You
read
mean
a
the
lot
Shambhala Mountain Center in Colorado?
yeah, well, there's one
Or
in
here?
White River Junction. There's
Okay.
one. but I've, taken courses in like level 1 and level 2,
Yeah.
but if I were to say that, like, you know what, I'm going to go for lunch and we're not really doing anything. I'm going to go meditate for an hour and then I'm going to be so much more there for my patients. It probably, even with these kind, good
Attending.
mentors, it's not going to fly. And I advise my patients on these things, but still the medical professionals are
Well, you
supposed
see,
to be these superhuman people
Thank you
that
for-
I'm not,
Right. In a talk like this, I can, in some sense, only point to how deeply the penetration has gone. However, what you're saying is not deep enough by any stretch of the imagination. And it takes a long, long time to shift a culture that has its own self-interest. A long time. So
Just like I'm sure it takes a long time for these people to get to your clinic, because I know the chronic pain patients we're seeing, we're not advising like any of the what
Well,
you guys.
yeah, but you could set up an MBSR. I mean, maybe there is. Is there an MBSR clinic at,
Not even close.
at Hitchcock? Well, that's not that radical to do. Are you in psychiatry?
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's not that radical to do. Maybe medicine should do it if psychiatry has an aversion to the mind-body connection. I even know gastroenterologists who are working with veterans who have PTSD, and pulmonologists, and this transcends specialty. So
There are some, and you would hope psychiatry would be the most open to it.
Well, I don't know if I would
I
hope,
can
but
say
you
I
would
haven't
hope.
brought it
If you
up,
hope it, then make it happen. You see, the psychiatry of the future, where does it lie?
Not in medication.
Well, where does it lie? I'm being serious with you now.
Well, I think in the neurosciences and
No,
things that
no,
you're.
I'm looking for something much simpler. It lies with you.